Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times bestselling author. Looking for ways to help your clients become less susceptible to market fluctuations and peer influence? Get powerful personalization for every investor with Orion Custom Indexing, our tech-enabled solution for managing tax-efficient, customized portfolios at scale. Learn more at orion.com/custom indexing.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Standard Deviations podcast. As ever, I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, but today we're going to do things a little differently. Normally I have a guest join me. I've had some brilliant guests join over the last 4 or 5 years, about 250 episodes in, but I wanted to take this opportunity to share some remarks I made at a recent event I did at the University of Georgia. It was an event for a lot of faculty and students and administrators at the University of Georgia, which is one of the best financial planning schools in the country. And they were kind enough to ask me to come share some thoughts, especially with the students there. And I wanted to share some of my remarks there in the hopes that they would be beneficial to you too. So the format that I took for this sort of presentation was sort of loosely based on my affinity for this NPR segment that I used to listen to called This I Believe, that asked people to write and share essays describing the core values that guided them and their daily lives. So during this presentation, I shared 7 This I Believe principles that were informed by my study of behavioral finance as it intersects with the important work done by financial planners every day. So it's my hope that you'll enjoy them just as much as the folks at UGA did. And without any further ado, I'll jump into my 7. So the first of these is that you are so very needed. Now, longtime listeners to this show will know that I'm from Alabama and that I like to say nice things about the South whenever possible. So I want to begin my remarks by talking about something that was done in Atlanta, my adopted hometown, that had never been done before in the history of the world. And this was actually eradicating a disease for which there was no cure. And the disease in question is guinea worms. And as recently as 1986, there were 3.5 million cases of guinea worms, primarily in Western Africa. And today there are fewer than 100 cases in the world, which means it's effectively eradicated. But what's so cool about this is that there is no cure, no vaccine, no pill, no potion, nothing you can take to make this go away. But it was cured, or eradicated rather, by the Carter Center, who sent educators over there and taught the folks impacted by guinea worms 2 simple behaviors. 2 simple behaviors, and by recognizing and understanding these 2 simple behaviors, they were able to rid the world of this disease that had caused so much damage, both personally and economically. And I view financial planners as being in that same boat. And this is why I think financial planners are so very needed. Because out in the world, and in America in specific, we are beset by the disease of financial mismanagement and sort of a screwy financial psychology. So we see that the average American has less than $25,000 saved for retirement. 43% of Americans are 90 days away from poverty, and half of those with access to a workplace plan do not contribute. Of the 40% of Americans who do receive financial advice, only about half of them take it as it's delivered. We are a sick country when it comes to making good decisions with our money, and financial planners have the cure for what ails us. Now, we know from studies from Aon Hewitt, Vanguard, Morningstar, and others that the value of working with an advisor is estimated at somewhere between 2 to 3% per year. And we actually saw this play out in an out-of-sample way in something called the Canadian Value of Advice Report that found that those who received some form of financial guidance over the long term had 2.7 times the wealth of their peers, even when controlling for a host of variables that might have explained that large gap. And there was actually work that came out just last week done by Dr. Shlomo Benartzi that found that the value advice was dramatically greater for historically underserved groups such as low-income families and could be as much as 10 times more valuable as it normally is. So we know that planners, that advisors have an enormous work to do. We have a huge problem in this country, and they have the cure for what ails us. But what's cool to me is that it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with just dollars and cents value added, because the research shows that those with an advisor report better marriages, greater peace of mind, higher levels of preparedness for an emergency, and greater readiness for retirement. We really are, as an industry, positioned in such a way that we can impact people's lives for the better in myriad ways. And so you are so very needed. You, this next generation of financial planners, are so very needed. But for the world to get what you've got, it's going to take telling a news story that's less product-centric and more people-centric. I love the work that I do because I saw my dad, who's an advisor, love it first and treat it like the calling that it is. And I hope that you'll understand how needed you are and you'll do the same. So the second pillar, this I believe, was actually taken from a former guest of the podcast who said, "You are the most unique thing about your business, so you should act like it." Now, I want you to think about the strangest person that you know. This is like your aunt or uncle who comes to Thanksgiving and always acts a little funny, and you wonder kind of what's up with them. I want you to think about this person and get them in your head. And when you do, you got them in your head? Got them in your head? Okay, good. Well, I want you to know that if we did that with a large enough cross-section of the world, that you would be the person that someone else is imagining. You are someone else's strangest person. And in fact, I think that's a good thing. And I think it's something that we need to own. Because there are over 300,000 people who are already doing the thing that you have trained to do. And I know not all of them offer holistic financial planning. And I know that not all of them do it with the same level of rigor or the same level of professional competency that you do. But from the outside looking in, for the average retail investor, you look just like 300,000 other people who have a similar title. And if you compete exclusively on the things that you have in common, you will fail. Because anyone can diversify a portfolio, but no one else can be you. Now, we're at one of the greatest schools in the South here, and as a great Southerner, Sir John Templeton taught us that if we want to beat the market, we have to meet two conditions. And I think these two conditions apply to you molding your career as well. Templeton said we have to have a contrarian take and we have to be right. If you do what others do, you're going to get what others get. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. So what's true of beating the market is true of having a world-beating professional career as well. You have to be different and you have to be right. Now, I spoke a little tongue-in-cheek at the beginning of this about imagining that strange relative of yours, but now I want to get a little bit more serious about mental illness. And I want to encourage you, whether it's legit mental illness or just a personality quirk, to own the weird, wonderful parts of yourself. Because the lifetime diagnosed prevalence of mental illness is 46.4%, and I think we could all agree that it's probably a lot higher than that if we were a little more candid and were a little quicker to seek treatment as a society. And the good news about that is that a lot of times these quirks that we may be ashamed of or may be slow to own are actually really great at molding us into wonderful people and wonderful advisors. Because we know that people who have suffered with anxiety and depression are on average more empathetic. We know people who have certain types of mania are more creative. People who have struggled with mental illness are often better in times of crisis, because when your whole life is tough, you build up resiliency and you build up strength. We also know that folks who are depressed show increased levels of realism and are often great decision makers and have added stores of resilience. In my book, The Behavioral Investor, I found a study that looked at brain scans that were done on folks as they were exposed to stimuli that are sort of the things you don't talk about at dinner. You know, money, sex, death, religion. And what they found is that, yes, all of this makes us a little haywire. All of it makes us a little crazy. But the thing that made us the most emotional was money. More than sex, more than death, more than religion, more than politics. Money was the thing that made us all a little crazy. So don't be afraid to tap into the emotional side of your life, to tap into your quirks, as it can help you reach others and their financial quirks. Be honest about who you are and where you've come from and what your money story is. Now, at this point in your career, and let's be honest, even where I am a couple of years, a decade plus into a career, you will sometimes have this strong impulse to imitate every part of a successful professional's routine. You're going to look at other people, you're going to try and codify what they do, and you'll be tempted to sort of mimic that. And while there's plenty of best practices you can learn from those who've gone before, you have to stop short of giving over who you are and what makes you you. Because inevitably, you are a weird amalgamation of experiences and cultures that is one of a kind. I'm a Mormon from Alabama, not many of us. I'm a clinical psychologist who works in finance, not many of us. I'm an avid fitness enthusiast who never misses a day at the gym and also never passes up a piece of chocolate cake. So if each one of these things is a quirk, that it's a bridge to others who you and only you can reach. And you can only do that when you own your weird, you own your uniqueness, and you wear that on your sleeve. Use these quirks to help you find your people, the people that only you can serve in the way that you do. The third principle is that you can only take your clients as far as you're willing to go yourself. I want you to reflect for a moment on the most valuable part of your educational journey. What's it been? Was it a class? Was it an experience, a project, a relationship? I don't know about you, but for me, the most valuable part of my graduate education was the taped therapy sessions that we watched, where my peers were able to watch and critique my efforts and help me uncover blind spots I had about myself that I had never confronted before. It allowed me to slowly relinquish the idea that I could be good and not be perfect, and to own the uglier parts or the parts of myself that I had been blind to historically. The famous psychiatrist Irvin Yalom says, only the wounded healer can truly heal. And inevitably, there are some in this room who've entered this profession because your money story is a painful money story. And you may have come here because you and your family of origin are broken and dysfunctional when it comes to your financial lives. And to you, I say, welcome to the club, because you're just like the rest of us. This brokenness is not something to hide behind, it's something to share as we normalize the joys and pains of the world of money with our clients. Your clients don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be you, and they need you to know who you are so you can help them uncover who they are. And it's only through this process of self-discovery that we're able to learn who we are, to help our clients learn who they are, and help us stay out of the way along the way. There's a psychological phenomenon that I love called the pratfall effect. And some of the original research on the pratfall effect looked at three types of politicians, right? The first politician was a bumbling politician who walks up to the podium clumsily, gets up there, delivers an uninspired speech, and then slumps down, okay? Unsurprisingly, no one wants to vote for that person. The second politician is flawless. They walk up there and deliver a perfect speech in an impeccably pressed suit, and there is not a hint of emotion, but there's not a hint of a flaw in their delivery. And then finally, we have the politician that is competent but imperfect. And the researchers actually set this up so that the politician would do things like, trip up a step when walking up to the podium, or spill a little coffee on their suit and crack a joke about it. And what we find is that we don't like people who are bumbling, but we also don't like people who are flawless. The politician that the most folks wanted to vote for was the one who was simultaneously competent but imperfect. You will put pressure on yourself to try and be perfect, oftentimes thinking that success lies in that perfection, but it really lies in competent realness. Competent realness that can only be achieved as you discover who you are at your core and what you stand for. The next principle is that finance is a humanity and a liberal art that can be used to discover the world. The Pew Research Organization reports that 27% of Americans have not read a single book in the past year. We also know that the average American lives 18 miles from the home they grew up in and watches 28 hours per week of TV, which is only slightly less than the average hours worked per week. We have a tendency to be lazy, to be provincial, to be status quo prone, and to stick to what we know. But if we do it right, and if we embrace finance as a humanity and a liberal art, a life and a career spent in markets fights all of these tendencies. As Jared Dillian says in his new book, when you work in finance, you understand how the world works. The average person sees used car prices rising and has no idea why, but the financier knows. The average person has no idea of the mechanics of a home mortgage. The financier knows. You work in finance, you become conversant at politics, geopolitics, raw material production, trade, the FDA approval process, venture capital and private equity, and many other things. In short, you become much more worldly. A kid from Staten Island can get hired and within a few years acquire enough sophistication to carry on an intelligent conversation with most world leaders. Money touches every part of our lives and every part of the world. The study of and pursuit of money as an end unto itself is boring and predictable. I'm sorry, but it's true. But the world that money opens up, as we examine everything it touches, can be a gateway to new ideas and experiences that can change us and round us out as people. The fifth principle that I believe in with all my heart is that the only risk is not taking any. I want to start this section with a conversation about my first ever client, a woman that I will call Brooke, which is not her real name. Now, to set the stage for you, when I met with this first ever therapy client, I was a ripe old age of 23, which I think you'll agree is a pretty funny age for dispensing life wisdom and telling people how they ought to do things. But nevertheless, here I was, 23 years old, believing that I could help other people make better decisions about how to live their lives. And so Brooke came to me, my first ever client. She comes to me and she presents me immediately with 6 envelopes. And I'm immediately overwhelmed because this was not on the test, right? Like this was not in the textbook. What are these 6 envelopes? So she comes to me, presents me with 6 envelopes, and she says, look, all my life, I have wanted to be a doctor. I've wanted to be a physician. And I've applied to these grad schools, and I've heard back from them, but I cannot bring myself to open these letters, these envelopes, because if I do, and I didn't get in, I will just be crushed. My dreams will be crushed. And so I've just been sitting on these envelopes, can't bring myself to open them. And so I was, again, immediately overwhelmed, had no idea. I was hoping for some, garden variety anxiety or a simple phobia, something I knew what to do with. But here she comes with these 6 envelopes. And so I imagine I said all kinds of dumb stuff for 30 or 40 minutes. But as we reached the conclusion of our 50-minute hour together, I had the thought that I expressed to her that, that Brooke, it occurs to me that in your best efforts to manage risk, you have brought upon yourself the inevitability of the very thing that you're afraid of. Because her greatest fear in life was not getting into medical school. But indeed, what happens if you hear back from a medical school and they never hear back from you? You don't get into medical school. So there's, I think, a lesson in Brooke's story. Oh, by the way, it does have a happy ending. She opened the letters and got into school, and I imagine, haven't kept track with her, but I imagine is a successful doctor who's out there helping people today. So I think Brooke's story is a great lesson for all of us, that sometimes the greatest risk we can take is not taking any risk at all. Now, risk is uniquely hard for humankind because it has uncertainty at its core, and there's few things we hate more than uncertainty. At the recent Orion Ascent conference, I shared some research on the fallout from World War II, and in specific, the bombing raids in the UK. So we know that London was shelled quite regularly. London was bombed, almost every night during the war. And then out a ways from London, in the suburbs and exurbs, it was bombed as well, but not with anything like the regularity of London. So about 10 times more bombing in London than the suburbs. But when researchers and doctors were working with folks after the war was over, they found that there were dramatically more ulcers and higher levels of stress in the suburbs. And why is that? They received 10 times less pain, but they had greater psychological pain because of that lack of predictability. Were things horrible in London? Yes, absolutely. But it was a horrible that you could count on, whereas in the suburbs, it was the uncertainty that killed. Now, I bring up this pain with uncertainty for 2 reasons. One has to do with your clients and one has to do with you. The first reason is that I think we need to keep this top of mind so that we can empathize with our clients, because every single thing we ask them to do is psychologically hard. I want you to think about this. We are wired for certainty. We ask our clients to take on risk, right? We are wired for immediacy and action, and we ask our clients to be patient and look out 30, 40, and 50 years. We should never forget this or lose sight of the difficulty of what we are asking our clients to do. They are placing their sacred trust in us, and we are asking them to do something very difficult. So when they push back or they don't do what we ask, we shouldn't be surprised, and we should be prepared for that, understanding their distaste for uncertainty. Second, I think there's opportunities for you to model intelligent risk-taking in your own life. I want you to think about the most meaningful thing you have ever done. Was it to start your graduate program? Was it to have a child? Was it to take a chance on love, start a business, start an advisory practice? because every single one of these things had risk and uncertainty at its core. Most relationships don't pan out. Heck, even half of all marriages don't work. 90% of small businesses fail within a couple of years. The attrition rate for young advisors is in the realm of 80%. And yet the people who have done these things, these meaningful things, would do it all again, because anything worthwhile you are going to do in life takes an element of risk and uncertainty. We ask our clients to take intelligent risk with their money every day. We need to take our own good advice and take intelligent risk with our lives. My sixth principle is that you will never have enough. Now, I debated whether or not to share this with a group of many of you who are about to graduate, some from undergrad, some from graduate programs, but maybe against my better judgment, here I go. So one of the most disappointing days of my life was the day I graduated with my PhD. And again, I know that's a terrible thing to say to many of you who've looked forward to this day for so long. And the reason was because I woke up the same person I was the day before. I was subject to the same mistakes, and I was subject to the same, short-sightedness and errors. And I was disappointed that I hadn't been transformed by that single event from a caterpillar into a butterfly. But with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, because it's opened doors to me that would have forever remained closed without it. Now, the PhD didn't change me. The work did, the opportunities did, and the PhD was what made the work possible. We see a similar result. A guest on my podcast came on recently and shared that buying luxury cars had actually increased the happiness level of one subset of men in retirement. And the researchers were fascinated because usually we don't see this, right? We see that things like big expenditures, big flashy cars, big houses don't do a lot to move the needle on happiness with respect to money. But they did with these gentlemen in retirement. Now, what they found, though, was that the car didn't change these men or make them happy. What did was that the friendships that they formed around the cars when they joined car clubs or cars and coffee, this sort of thing. It wasn't the car that did it, but the car was a vehicle, to allow them to join these clubs where they could affiliate with people with similar interests. So why do I tell you about this PhD? Why do I tell you about the cars? And what does that have to do with this idea that you will never have enough? Well, soon you will enter the workforce and you will have access to a line of work that has the potential to be financially rewarding, which is a great thing after many years of school, right? That's good. It has a host of positive effects. But I want you to remember that it should never be the primary means by which you make decisions about your life and your career. We know now with a great deal of certainty what makes people happy. And it's some of the following: fun experiences, deep work, strong relationships, working for something bigger than ourselves, and getting a little bit better each day. Money can be a vehicle for making each of those things happen. It is absolutely true, but it can never be the main thing. Every job has its occupational hazards, and one of the hazards of our work is that money can become too real, too important, and loom too large in our minds. A lifetime of studying how to plan for, invest, and steward money can make money become the most central thing in our lives, which is a reliable formula for personal misery. Money can buy happiness when it's used to meet basic needs or to further the 5 dimensions I mentioned above. Money can also buy happiness when it's used to experience something novel, spend time with a loved one, get out of a hated task like mowing the lawn for me, or when it is given away philanthropically. Money is neither the root of all evil, nor is it the source of all happiness, And it's only when we can put it in its proper place and teach our clients to do the same that we and they will be living the best lives possible. Finally, I want to suggest to you that how is easy and why is hard. Those of you who have gone to one of the greatest financial planning institutions in the country, have learned a great deal in your time at this fine institution. You've learned complex things that are of real value to the people you will serve, but there can be a temptation to put those hows ahead of clients' whys, assuming that it is complexity that cures. Let me suggest to you instead that one of the most powerful things that you can do is to help clarify your clients' values and keep them front and center throughout their financial journey. When we look at equity flows, when we look at fund flows from 2007 to 11, we see that in many asset classes, and especially in places like equities, people were pulling money out of the market. But there was one vehicle in particular where people continued to contribute to and that was college savings funds. And if you think about it, why was that? Why, when people were selling out and going to cash in their discretionary funds, were they continuing to contribute to 529 and similar college savings plans? Well, the reason was because the why was right in front of them. To borrow an idea from Stephen Covey and to use his terminology, they had a yes burning inside of them that was bigger than the no of their fear. Now, one study that I love to talk about is a study out of Canada that found that those who were primed with a picture of their children saved twice as much for retirement as those in a control group, because we tied the why to the how. A study done in the Great Financial Crisis, observed differences in the Great Financial Crisis, found that those in goals-based accounts were 12 times less likely to go to cash than those in unnamed traditional accounts. Again, the goals-based account had tied that why to the how. We are a part of the most financially abundant society to have ever lived. And I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. And yet, within this abundant society, we are experiencing a mental health crisis and levels of deaths of despair that are absolutely unprecedented. As Frankl said, my hero, Viktor Frankl, evermore, people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. More and more, we have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. Now, you may not have learned this in school, but I promise you that in the workforce, you can be a force for good, helping people to articulate that why, make it vivid, incorporate it into the planning process, and allow it to better their financial decisions. Yes, but also to better their lives. As I begin to close out, I'd like to close with some words from Jason Zweig, the well-known financial writer. And Jason says, "You will do a great disservice to yourselves, to your clients, and to your business if you view behavioral finance mainly as a window onto the world. In truth, it is also a mirror that you must hold up to yourselves. More worrisome, it is a mirror that magnifies and clarifies and highlights your own warts and imperfections. After all, it takes no great bravery to look out a window onto the world below and watch the foolish masses aimlessly stumbling nowhere near where they really want to go, while you can see quite clearly from your lofty vantage point the simplest and safest path to follow. But it takes a great deal of courage to stare into a mirror and to hold it steady for a long, long time while this image sinks in. Gazing right back at you is someone who relentlessly falls prey to the law of small numbers, to hindsight bias, to overreaction, to narrow framing, to mental accounting, to status quo bias, to the inability to evaluate your own future regret, and most of all, to overconfidence." Close quote. The field you have chosen is one that requires a great deal of you personally if it is to be done well, but I promise you that it will give you back so much more in return. As you embark on this next phase of your journey, I hope that you will do so with a mind filled with all of the lessons that you have learned here, but more importantly, a heart attuned to serve those in your path with rigor, honesty, and candor, leveraging your unique gifts to provide them a life-changing service that can bless their lives today and their families' lives for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.